Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Your Life podcast. My name is Art Burns, and I am even more excited than I think I may have ever been. And that is because look behind me. For all of you who are listening to this on the podcast, I encourage you to check out the YouTube just for this once. You don't really have to, but I'm letting you know that I have this beautiful plant that I just bought that I put up above my desk, and it feels so good, and it looks so much better in the background of this video. Instead of having this big empty white square, I have this beautiful little pothos that I bought just the other day. It's hanging on a handmade little hanger that's hanging on the wall, and I'm just so excited about it. I've told you all here a couple of times now that about a year and a half ago I started the hobby of keeping houseplants, and let me tell you something, keeping houseplants is awesome. I mean, it feels great. It's such a gratifying occupation. You're caring for something, right? And taking the time. And it's also it's a great opportunity to practice mindfulness because you're caring about something. And in order to care about something, you have to pay attention to that something, right? It's the only way it works, right? And so caring for houseplants is a great way to kind of remind yourself to pay attention to something that is not the thoughts and the worries and the anxieties and the vaccinations and the schools opening or whatever it is, right? All this stuff that can invade our minds and create the havoc of stress in our bodies, right? It really comes down to just stopping and just paying attention to something that is not all of those things. And by paying attention to some houseplants, right? Because you gotta monitor them, right? All houseplants require different water, different light, and everything else. So you have to pay attention to all the things in their environment. You have to feel their soil. You have to pay attention to the light they're getting. You have to watch them to notice how they're responding. A plant is going to tell you when it's not happy with a certain circumstance. If you're going to overwater a plant, the leaves are going to get yellow. If there's a contaminant in your water, the leaves might start turning brown. If you underwater, your leaves are going to start wilting and drying out. And so all of these things are great ways to everybody can be an expert plant person, right? As long as you're paying attention. Right? Because if you're paying attention, the plants are going to tell you what they need. And that's very, very little difference between that and the emotional awareness that we talk about here in this podcast, right? When you are paying attention to your emotions and the circumstances that are creating the emotions, including your thoughts and everything else, when you're paying attention to it, it gives you the resource of being able to manage it. Right? So you can know when emotionally you're feeling something that requires your attention. And when you give it that attention, more often than not, it regulates on its own, basically, which is what I'm talking about with the plants, right? It's not a secret, right? There's very little complexity to it at all, right? The leaves start wilting or drooping a little bit. You got to water them. You just kind of, get a sense of how dry the soil is when that starts happening. And that is your watering cue from now on, right? And it's just like, again, it's very, very similar to the work that we do here. And so if any of you are looking for some tips on how to keep houseplants, what houseplants are easy, what houseplants are hard, and or require more more care and more sort of finesse, hit me up. I'll certainly be happy to spend a few minutes with you and kind of get you on the road to this, because again, it is so satisfying. And I'm telling you, one of the greatest things is when you see new growth coming off your plants, because you see, and this is like, again, what we talked about with a couple of weeks ago with our old friend Jerry Garcia, right? How he said that having something in your life, right, that you do every day, right, and that is complete, the progress of which is completely dependent on how much energy you're putting into that thing. Well, houseplants is a perfect example of that, right? As is your meditation, as is all of it, but houseplants will work. And so why not? Right? Because again, it is just so absolutely gratifying to see the plants grow and to see them thrive. And it's, and if you're looking for any resources on that, let me know. I can send you some of the YouTube videos that I've watched, or like I said, we can go back and forth with email or even jump on a call. I'd be happy to do that for you and with you. So welcome the new welcome the new plant over here. I'm really excited about her, and I think she's excited to be here too. So welcome her aboard, and I haven't named her yet. I'll come up with something, and it might change. The configuration might change. I keep going to the other side. You can't see this on the podcast, but the image here is reversed, and so it's really hard for me. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, my hair's in my eye, and I go and it's the opposite side of my head. So the same thing is happening with the plan, right? So if I do that now, I'm like, okay, that's the plan, right? But not that. So anyway, sorry about that. But the configuration might change. Like we might wind up putting another plant up there with her, or we might, wind up moving her a little bit. That's still to come. So you can watch that and also watch her grow through all these different videos. I'm really excited to see that too. So now that we've covered that, I appreciate you taking the time to hear me out about my wonderful plant that I'm so excited for. But let's get on to what we're really talking about here today, and that is I want to follow up a little bit on the concept that we talked about last week, which was the sense of arriving, right? And arriving and arising, right? Or as we feel life kind of arise in the present moment, right? And it almost gives us when we can kind of focus our attention on that a little bit, it gives us a sensation that we're always arriving. Right, which is true, right? We're always arriving in this present moment, right? And as we're always arriving in this present moment, that gives us the opportunity to arrive with intention, right? And the intention is the part that we can control, right? And so when we set that intention to arrive mindfully, to arrive with compassion, to arrive with presence, to arrive with curiosity, and to arrive with acceptance and the ability to let go and the ability to question, what is real here? Am I really seeing what is actually happening versus am I seeing something that I'm making up on my own, right? When we get this sense that we are arriving in every single moment, right? This gives us this instills in us, or it encourages us to sense the power that we have, the potential that every present moment, every moment that arises, the potential is there for things to turn around and for things to be different, right? Whether that's us, aligning to the intention that we've set, right? Like if we say that we're and setting the intention to be compassionate all day long and to be kind to people all day long, right? In any given moment that we find ourselves not being that, well, that moment is the opportunity to go back to that, right? And to return to it over and over and over. And that's the thing. Just like I described in the meditation practice, right? Every time you realize that you're not aligned with whatever that intention is, and you align yourself in that moment, well, that's a practice, right? And the more you do that, the more you're going to find yourself aligning with the intentions that you set. It's a practice, and you're going to get better at it as long as you keep doing it. Right? And so it's a great informal practice for us. It's something that I do a lot, and I invite you to try it, to really just set an intention, in the morning. Like, this is what I'm going to do all day today. And, maybe it's a phone buzzing that reminds you a few times, or maybe it's a Post-it note on your work computer or on the refrigerator or the coffee machine or whatever, or all of those places, to remind yourself to check in. Are you there with your intention right now, or are you not? And when you find that you're not, show yourself a little compassion, right? A little kindness. It's not your fault. You're new at this. You're just getting out. And even if you've been doing it for a long time, it's not a flaw, right? It's just the process of your mind. And it's not something that's bad, and it's not something that's good. But every time, and if you can see it that way, right? If you can see it without that, the heaviness of having done it wrong, or having failed, right? Or see it without the clinging of, I just got to get this right? Anytime we can do that, when we can do it without that clinging and aversion, well, that's when we're going to incorporate it a little bit more every single day. We're going to incorporate it into our mindset, into our worldview, if you will. And that then becomes a natural inclination of the mind. And that's the way all of these practices work. All right. But let's talk about something else. When we talked the other day about, it's just really funny because like 3 conversations since I had the video the other day, 3 conversations came up that all had the same thing happening. So it's telling me something that needs to be said, right? So when we talk about arriving, right? Again, whether we want to think about arriving in the sort of theoretical sense, like I just mentioned, like that, every moment is a new arriving, right? Arising and arriving are very synonymous in that sense, right? But even when we're talking about physically arriving, right? Like literally driving our car and parking our car outside a house that we're going into, right? That in that moment when we are physically arriving somewhere, right? It's if we can get ourselves into the habit of intentionally arriving, right? Which is to say, as I talked about last week, which is to say, take a few moments and just recognize that, okay, I am arriving here. Right. And in that moment that we allow ourselves to check in and to recognize that I am arriving in this place. I've just pulled my car into this parking space. I'm about to open the car door handle and walk into that house or that store or that bank or that UPS store, or whatever it is, right, that I have to deal with, right? Maybe it's somebody's house, whatever it is, right? I'm about to do this. Now, what happens is when we do it this way, right? When we train ourselves to intentionally arrive in every situation, which again means to give yourself that time and acknowledge that, okay, this is what I'm doing, right? It gives us an opportunity to do 2 really important things. Number 1, it gives us an opportunity to notice what it is that's in store for us in there. Right? Like, is this something that I really want to do? Or is this something I really dread doing? Right? Giving ourselves a moment to recognize that is going to give us a sense of, again, it's pausing a little bit. So if there was any kind of tension or anxiety alive with this thing that's coming and causing stress in your body, this just noticing it just briefly can interrupt that process of stress. And in that interruption, now we can, shift, and now we have a chance to redirect, right? But really importantly is something, the second benefit that we have, right? Because as we notice that, okay, I have to go into this house, and that person that's going to be in at this, Super Bowl party or whatever it is, right? The person that's going to be inside right now, it's already in there. I can see their car. The last time I saw this person, it was very uncomfortable because of X, Y, and Z. Pardon me. So the idea then is that now is my chance not only to recognize pardon me, how I'm feeling about this, but also gives me a chance to prepare before I go into the house. And what that means, right, is that means taking a measure of control over the situation, right? Let me walk you through a little scenario, right? Because again, astonishingly, this happened like 3 or 4 times last week, right? Right after I posted that video, and it's not like people are calling me and saying, oh my gosh, I got a story for you about arriving. I'm talking about people who didn't even watch the video, right? They're telling me these stories, client conversations in our calls, the next 4 calls after that video. People were telling me the same thing over and over and over again. So it really, it's begging to be told here, okay? So, okay, here's the scenario. You show up to, let's say, a friend's house, right? And you're all gonna have a big spaghetti dinner, right? And you're bringing the salad, right? And you're really, you're just pulled up, and let's say you're in a state of mind that, right, for whatever reason you're in a compromised state of mind. Let's say that, like, let's say you had a very stressful day at work, right? Like, the whole day was just one big old mess after another, right? And you're feeling not 100%, right? You can sense that in your body, right? So sitting there for a moment, and then also, let's add a little dimension of this, and let's say the person inside that house, right, where you're going in, as I said a minute ago, like, let's say there was some sort of disagreement with somebody, right? Like, happened a couple of months ago, and for whatever reason, y'all had a big of an argument, right? And you haven't talked since, right? And you know that this thing needs to be resolved. Now, maybe it was your fault, maybe it was their fault. That kind of doesn't matter, right? But let's say that something needs to be resolved here, right? And you're feeling a little bit of a weakened state, and you're also dreading the fact that this thing has to be resolved, right? So now here you are sitting in the car, right? Now, most of us, and again, without intention and without conscious awareness, most people just turn the car off, open the door, grab the salad, and walk in and see what happens, right? But let's review, right? You're feeling, less of a state where you're going to handle the stressors, right? Because you've been stressed all day, so you're feeling very, agitated and reactive, right? And number two, you have no idea what you're going to feel when you encounter that person, right? And it's going to be a blindsiding thing. And at that point, you might as well flip a coin to see how you're going to handle it, right? Because you don't know, right? You might do great. You might come out of there saying, like, I'm surprised at how well I did in that situation. Or you might wind up, dumping the salad out onto the table and taking your bowl and going driving home, right? Like, it's impossible to say, right? And the reason it's impossible to say is because you haven't considered it yet. Right. And so as we consciously arrive, this is an opportunity for us to take stock in what is about to happen there. Now I know, this might sound a little counterintuitive, right? Because a lot of what we talk about here is we cultivate a level of presence, acceptance, compassion, and curiosity. When we cultivate these things to be a trait of our personality, well, then it's true. At that point, we don't really have to do this sort of step of contemplating what's coming and kind of planning for it and preparing for it, right? But even at that point, there are going to be situations where you need that, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, right? And there's nothing wrong with, as you're cultivating those qualities in yourself, there's nothing wrong with taking a pause and preparing for what you believe is going to happen, right? Now, that's completely different from saying, okay, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen? Let me really obsess about that and tell myself this really accurate sounding story about the worst possible case scenario here, right? There's a big difference between that and sitting outside a house where you're about to walk in and saying, okay, so-and-so is going to be there. I see her car right there. I know she's going to be inside there. So let me take stock in what happened. Let me ground myself in how the interaction is going to go, right? And the reason I tell you this, and the real benefit to this, right, is that, one of the most common and earliest, causes of stress in our body is the perception that we don't have control over a situation, right? And so when you walk in just holding your salad and walk in blind to this dinner party, right, and you see that person, immediately you are going to sense a lack of control. At least it's very likely that you might. Right now, I can't tell you everybody's going to react the same way, but it's very possible that you're going to experience a perception of lack of control. And if you experience a perception of lack of control, then you're going to feel stress that much easier and that much more quickly, right? There won't be as many warning signs. There won't be as many, there won't be that sort of, gray area where you're not stressed, but you're still, you're not sure where you're. No, you're going to go from 0 to stressed in like a second, right? Because, again, you're setting yourself up for it, right? Just by feeling like you don't have control over the situation. Right. So if you can take a few breaths, right. And I definitely recommend that if you're facing a conflict situation. And again, it doesn't have to just be some dinner party, right? It could also be, going into the bank and knowing that that's, always a hassle, right? It's always that lady behind the counter is always giving me a hard time. And I can't, I know it's going to take me 20 minutes right now, that kind of thing. Or, showing up to the DMV, or to traffic court or something like that, right? There's all kinds of circumstances in which we might feel a level of fear that we're not conscious about, right? So this arriving gives you an opportunity to examine that feeling that you're having, right? So whatever it is that you're feeling about this certain circumstance that's happening, this is your opportunity to get in touch with those feelings, right? And when you're in touch with them, when you bring a conscious awareness to what you're feeling, a couple of really important things happen, right? Number one, you don't feel it as much, right? Like just bringing attention to it, just bringing your awareness and surrounding this thing with your awareness alone is going to, deflate that feeling that you're having, right? It's going to, like a lot of times when I'm doing meditations, I'm guiding people through meditations, a lot of times I do a body scan, right? And I've had many people tell me, I'm thinking of one person in particular who had a spinal injury at some point, right? And when we just breathe awareness into that part of your body, this woman told me that just sitting there and just watching and not trying to move, not trying to change something, but just breathing the awareness into that part of the body, all of a sudden it was hurting less. Like just by doing that, it made the pain change. Right? The same process, the same principle applies to the process of your emotions and how you're feeling about a certain thing, right? So so the point here is that by giving yourself that moment, right? And again, I'm sorry I got digressed, but what we're what we're talking about here is, pulling up in front of the place, right? Whether it's your friend's dinner party or the store or the post office or the bank or the traffic court, whatever it is, before you enter that, right, take a moment, right? Take a few moments, take some real deep diaphragmatic breaths, right? Really feel your breath, calm yourself down, bring yourself into this present moment. By watching your breath, remember, you're bringing yourself into the present moment because your breath is always present, right? So bring yourself in, right? And now, just contemplate, like, what is the likelihood of that situation? What's it most likely going to be like, right? This person's inside, the bank teller's there, the court is there, whatever it is, right? And ask yourself, as you go through it, right? Ask yourself a couple of questions, right? Now, first question is, am I seeing this for really what it is? Or am I reading something into it? Right? Like, is that lady really giving me a hard time, or is that just the way she is? And so should I take it so personally, right? That's the first question, asking yourself if what I'm seeing is real, right? Am I seeing it for what it really is, or am I looking at it through the prism of my own experience, my own attachment, my own aversion, right? Second question, is there something here that I can be accepting that will change the way that I'm feeling about this? Right? A follow-up to that, is there something that I should be letting go or I could be letting go of right now that would also change the way that I feel about this and might change the way that I do whatever I'm about to do? Right? Again, the answers are not that important. I mean, the answers will come, but it's more about asking the question, right? Because by asking that question, we're We're steeping ourselves into the present moment. And in steeping ourselves into the present moment, we're interrupting that whole cycle. So you're bound to see things a little bit differently. And if you're confused about that first step, right? Am I seeing things for what they really are? There's another question you could ask yourself, okay? What if everything I think about this thing that's about to happen, what if every thought that I have about it is exactly opposite to the truth? It's a powerful question, right? Again, you're not going to come up with the answer, but what it's going to do is going to give you a balance, right? To say, okay, wait a second. Yeah. Now that feels good. I might be misreading this, and that's okay, right? It might be just because I'm in this agitated mood, right? And so asking yourself those questions, right? And then finally, based on what you come up with those questions, we're going to bring it back now. And now you can set an intention before you get out of your car, before you open the door to go in, right? If you're walking or riding your bike with your salad on the back of your bike, right? You can then set an intention to say, you know what? I'm going to be very open about what's happening. When I see that person or I confront that thing, whatever it is, I'm going to set the intention now to be open to whatever I find when I get in there. And that could change everything for you. All right? Because again, it goes back to what we said. You set that intention and then you find yourself, kind of revving up with something that you're, going off with your thoughts about this thing. And you have that opportunity now to say, remember my intention. Let's bring it back in. Let's just reset and become more open again. Okay. Now, I'm not promising you that every situation is going to go completely smooth because of this, but every time you do this, it's going to get smoother and smoother and smoother. But one last point, okay, because above all of this, right, these are all techniques that you can use to keep yourself grounded and keep yourself, even, because the thing is, right, when you're in that stress response, whatever happens, it's again, you might as well flip a coin, right? Because you're not really acting with your intentional mind at that point. So reducing the stress in and of itself is going to be a huge improvement on the potential outcome of that situation, right? But here's the other thing. By doing this, right, by acknowledging, because while you're doing that pause and you're asking yourself these questions, you're also sensing, right, and this is another question you can ask yourself, right, is everything else that's going on in my world right now, is this impacting the way I'm going to approach this situation in that house or in that store or that bank or whatever it is, right? Am I being colored by what's happened to me at work today or what have you, right? Because now what you're doing here, right? And even just asking some of these questions, even without that last part, right? Just checking in with yourself, you're building an awareness of what's happening inside of you, right? And as you build that awareness and you expand and deepen that awareness, what happens is you get the opportunity now to say, you know what? I'm in a crappy mood right now. I had all this stuff happen today. That person at work was mean and rude to me. That client hung up the phone on me. I lost that sale, whatever it is, right? Just acknowledging that this is something that's causing you to be not 100%, right? So now what that does is that allows you to walk into that circumstance, right? Your friend's dinner party or the bank or the store, what have you. It allows you to walk into that with the acknowledgement, the conscious acknowledgement that, you know what, I'm not 100% today. And so that opens you up to a couple of really important things. Number one, you can announce to people inside there. You can say, hey, listen, I just want you to know something, right? I know that we got to talk about this thing that's happening, and I'm not saying I don't want to talk about it, but I just want you to know that I had a really, really tough day at work, or, I just had a fight with my partner before I left the house, and my kids were cursing at me, and I just, I'm really in a shaky place right now. I want to have this important conversation. I want to honor your time and do this with you, but I need you to know that I'm probably not going to come off as my normal self. And if that's the case, I don't want you to think it's because of you. You see what I just did there? What I just did there was I showed you how to be honest and true and authentic to the emotions that you're experiencing. Because the fact of the matter is that the emotions that you're experiencing are not bad and they don't make you wrong, right? You're allowed to have the emotions that you're feeling. In fact, if you're going to ignore them, it's only going to make things much, much more confusing and much, much more difficult. And when somebody hears you say something like that, you know what they hear? They hear, I care enough about this situation that you and I are in, this conversation that you and I are about to have, this transaction you and I are about to have at this bank. I care enough to let you in on what's happening here. And you know what? That is going to feel great to the other person. And if there was this kind of animosity, it already just got dialed down, right? Now, look, caveat here, okay? You don't know what the other person's going through either, right? So if they turn around and say, well, I don't give a damn about your bad day, blah, 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 we're going to talk about this, you can't control that. Right. So that's where the presence, acceptance, compassion, and curiosity are going to come back around. But that's also something that you can acknowledge, right? You can do that as you're arriving, right? Like you can say to yourself, like, hey, does Jane also, maybe she's having a bad day. And maybe when I approach her with this, maybe she's going to give me some kind of what for, and so I can prepare myself for that too. So it really all comes down to, using the information that we have available to us to prepare ourselves for the circumstances in which we're arriving. And when we can prepare ourselves, again, we give, if nothing else, we give ourselves a sense of control. And with that sense of control, we are going to discourage this stress response in our body. Without that level of control, we're going to encourage that stress response in our body. All right, everybody. Art Burns and Art Burns' New Plant signing off. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, whatever, please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay? I'll put a couple of those old links in the comments for you too, or in the description rather, in case you want to check out any of the meetings that we're having or become a patron or any of the things, right? And the new podcast and all that. So I'll put those links in the description here, as I always do these days. And I just want you to know that I wish you well. And again, if you have any questions about this, I encourage you to reach out and ask me. Okay? All right, everybody. Have a great day. I wish you well. Take care. Bye-bye.